Welcome to MHCH's Housing Justice Forum on Racial Justice and Housing. Tonight, we will hear about how cities are required to affirmatively further fair housing. Cities are required by state law to make sure that people are not subjected to racial bias and discrimination when they seek a place to live. Our guest speaker, Anthony Deduces, will explain this policy and how it applies to cities like Pasadena. We will begin this night's forum with Dr. Jill Shook, the Executive Director of Making Housing and Community Happen. She will begin by sharing personal stories and a devotion.
I was on a corner in my car on Washington Boulevard going west and making a left turn on Fair Oaks Boulevard to go south. And I think the signal changed at least 10 times before I could make a left because there was a funeral procession going on, and it was coming from the north down Fair Oaks, and they were making a left onto Washington. I was the first one in line, and so I could get a good, I could see right into the face of every single person that turned left. And it was amazing to me because not one person was white. Every single person was African American. And I thought, how could that many people, which is beautiful to see that many people were honoring a life, I'm sure, of an amazing person, whoever that was. But how could they live their entire life in a city as small as Pasadena and not know one white person well enough to have them come to your funeral? And at the same time, I was reading a book called Divided by Faith. And so that book basically talked about how the church is still one of the most divided in America, divided institutions. We typically get jobs maybe from people we might know at church. We might find housing from people we know at church. Before long, our entire life is connected to our faith community, part of a church that's all white or all Black, all Asian, all Latino. And pretty soon we have homogeneous communities. And so today, my husband reminded me of another funeral. And that was for the daughter of Pastor Kerwin Manning and Pastor Madeline Manning. There was a sudden death of their wonderful young daughter, and with a very rare disease. It was amazing, truly amazing to be at that funeral at Lake Avenue Church. They filled up a big portion of the church with a whole mix of economic diversity, racial diversity, age diversity. It was one of the most magnificent celebrations of life I've ever been to. And so I think about what that experience was like to be there. And I also think about Matthew chapter 6, where it talks about the Lord's Prayer. And in that prayer, it says, "Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven." And so I think this, bringing a little heaven to earth is what I experienced that day at that beautiful celebration of life. And that's really what we're trying to do here in Pasadena by helping people with housing instability to have a little piece of heaven on earth and a way they can survive, and not just survive, but thrive, and without constantly struggling with the cost of housing. I'm reminded of one other scripture from Ephesians chapter 2, and it talks about breaking down the dividing wall between us. And I love that scripture. So years ago, when I was on staff at Lake Avenue Church, and I was able to help bring two speakers. They both spoke together from the same pulpit at the same time. They took turns speaking from that passage. One was Black and one was white, and they each shared their perspective on that passage. One from a Black perspective and one from a white perspective, how they understood that verse. That was so powerful. It started a whole racial reconciliation movement within the church. It's very amazing, the power of truth, when we begin to grasp it and it begins to sink deep into our hearts and it begins to transform us from the inside out. So I hope that tonight will help you do that. We want to see racial reconciliation in land use, that's no longer disparity within our community because of long shadows of unjust racial inequities that have specifically been against people of color. And so tonight you have an opportunity to learn how many voices in California have come together. And those voices have been heard at the highest level, making it law and requirement for every single city to now plan for how they're going to address racial disparities within our communities. So it's a very exciting evening, and I just want to thank you so much for being here tonight.
Thank you, Jill, for that moving report and spiritual reflection, profound spiritual reflection as we address our main topic for the night, which is racial justice in housing. Before that, I'm going to do a presentation here on the committees of MHCH. So I'm going to share my screen here. Can everybody see that? Let me see, got to do the slideshow from the beginning. Okay, so what's happening at MHCH, otherwise known as Committee Reports. So Making Housing and Community Happen operates through several part-time staff, a couple of interns, and more than 50 volunteers in 7 different committees. So here are their stories. Let's start with the Safe Parking Committee. In the San Gabriel Valley, there are about 1,241 people living in 675 vehicles. But until recently, there was no safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley. But on April 1st of this year, MHCH helped launch the first safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley. In addition to getting a safe place to park, participants get case management, they get referrals for job placement and long-term housing, as well as a porta potty, access to a porta potty, among other things. If you want to make a referral to the Safe Parking Program, contact Melody McNulty at Foothill Unity Center. You can get her at melody@foothillunitycenter.org or 626-385-3486, extension 213. Next up, our Congregational Land Committee. This committee consults with churches to build affordable housing. It's currently consulting with 12 churches right now actively. One of those is New Life Holiness in the picture right there. But there are more than 40 churches across Southern California who have reached out to our committee to express interest in building affordable housing, including 2 more in Pasadena just this month. This committee recently presented in a webinar for city planners of various cities on how to rezone religious land for affordable housing. In fact, that is a big part of the work. This committee is working with various cities to change the zoning to make it easier to get affordable housing built on congregational land. If we adjust zoning on a case-by-case basis, that can add years and hundreds of thousands of dollars to each individual project. So changing zoning will get the housing built faster and allow money to go further to build more housing. Our Congregational Land Committee is currently working to get zoning changed on religious land in Pasadena, Sierra Madre, Fullerton, Yorba Linda, Gardena, and Laguna Beach, among other places. In addition to all that, this committee also participates in a statewide coalition to change zoning for religious land across California. Despite unanimous support in the state Senate, the effort has stalled in the Assembly. So meanwhile, the coalition has decided to focus on assisting cities in getting zoning changed. So since our committee is already doing that work, MHCH our committee is providing expert consultation to the statewide coalition, providing a model ordinance and guidance on how to work with city governments. Next are Affordable and Supportive Housing Advocates, or ASHA. This is our main advocacy committee, which tends to run or participate in multiple campaigns simultaneously. Just this past December, this committee ran and won a campaign to build 112 units of affordable senior housing, 10% of it for seniors experiencing homelessness, in the Pasadena Civic Center, right in the middle of our city. This committee is also assisting in the campaign to rezone religious land for affordable housing, and it is creating strategies to encourage landlords to accept Section 8 tenants. This committee is also part of a wider coalition that is holding Pasadena accountable to the state for state mandated targets that could result in 6,000 affordable homes in 8 years. And finally, this committee is also working on a fast and temporary housing solution for people experiencing homelessness, tiny homes. They just did an amazing workshop for the public on this. If you missed that, you really missed a great presentation. That brings us to the Community Land Trust Committee. Community land trusts make home ownership more affordable by allowing people to buy the house, but not having to buy the land because the land is owned by a nonprofit. And that keeps the housing affordable in perpetuity. Our committee is working to create a community land trust in the San Gabriel Valley. It has formed a steering committee to move toward incorporation as a nonprofit. It has joined the California Community Land Trust Network. It is positioning itself to be able to take advantage of opportunities to access funds, to acquire assets for the portfolio, and it is identifying cities as potential partners. Next up is North Fair Oaks Empowerment. This committee is composed of members from churches on North Fair Oaks Avenue, and their motto is revitalization without gentrification. Their part of the city has been neglected by the city government, so they're working to change that by addressing signage, getting more trees, sidewalk repairs, and affordable housing, which is their #1 priority. They are also doing something called Complete Streets, which is a transportation policy and design approach that requires streets to be planned, designed, operated, and maintained to enable safe, convenient, and comfortable travel and access for users of all ages and abilities, regardless of their mode of transportation. For this, they are hiring a landscape architect to draw the Complete Streets plan. Now, Etta Jordan, who is with us tonight, is just finishing up. She helped coordinate a crucial community survey, and she is completing her internship this month. She will be succeeded by 2 summer interns who will work with this committee. And that brings us to the ADU committee. ADUs are accessory dwelling units, also known as back houses or granny flats. They provide another source of affordable housing throughout Southern California cities. I happen to live in one. Between 2003 and 2017, only 1 legal ADU was built in Pasadena, but this committee has worked to turn that around, and ADUs are now being built again in our city. Currently, the committee is working to eliminate all fees for building ADUs if the landlord agrees to accept Section 8 vouchers, and to allow ADUs above garages. Additionally, this committee is offering a series of 3 workshops. The first one is June 1st, that workshop is on how to pick your team to build an ADU. July 6th, they're going to have a workshop on how to advocate for ADU policy. And on August 3rd, on a workshop on financing your ADU. This committee is also meeting with council members in the planning department to work on ADU policy. This committee has done such great work that the city of Pasadena asked MHCH for a recommendation for a grant to fund an effort to streamline the process for ADUs, for building ADUs in the city, which is what MHCH has been asking for. So that was really wonderful. That was really interesting and wonderful. That brings us to the congregational liaisons. We have developed a network of over 20 liaisons and over 20 congregations in Pasadena. The role of these liaisons is to mobilize their congregations for the work of housing justice and be ready to jump into an action when there's a need for a rapid response to advocate for a policy in the city. One of these churches that stands out is Pasadena Foursquare Church. Their liaison, Chase Stafford, and their pastor, Brita Pinkston, have formed a housing justice team, with which we have conducted workshops on organizing and advocacy. They have joined several calls with their city council representative to advocate for the rezoning of church land for affordable housing. And now they're going to host our next press conference and prayer vigil for that campaign. Other liaisons have done great work too. They have gathered letters to rezone church land. One of our liaisons made a video for her congregation to teach people how to submit a comment at the city council meeting. Others have testified themselves at city council meetings or other events. or join phone calls with council representatives or state representatives. Our liaisons are doing a whole bunch of stuff. If you are interested in being a liaison for your congregation, or you are a pastor and want your church to be a liaison church, then contact me. My name is Bert Newton at bert@makinghousinghappen.org. So that concludes our committee reports. And now I think, Anthony, are you ready with the poll that we're going to do?
I am, yeah. Is it okay if you give me screen share access? I mean, my thought was I was just gonna tee up the topic for tonight and then just like run a few questions by the.
Oh yeah. I was
okay?
actually, yeah, I was actually asking Anthony Manousis. He was going to do a poll.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, Carla, you've taken charge of the poll. Why don't you do that?
Okay, Carla's going to do the poll. Sorry, Anthony. Yeah, we're gonna do the poll. And then if Falante gets on, we're going to do her story, and then we'll do the main topic. Otherwise, we're going to do the poll and then your topic, and then Falante, when she gets on, will do her story. But so Carla, if you can do the poll, that'd be great.
Yeah, actually, I seem to not have access on my end. So back to Anthony Manousis, if you can launch
I
it.
just gave you access. You have access now.
I don't.
I don't have access. Jill, do you?
Anyone
click-
should have access. Yeah.
Just click on the poll and see what happens.
Maybe it won't work. I don't know.
Yeah, Carly, it should be you. You're the host.
Yeah, it should be. But it's letting me know that my polling session is inactive. So sorry about that, you guys. I'm trying to see how I can. It's saying that I'm logged in from another device.
Oh, maybe that's it.
Okay. Okay, then, yeah.
Okay, we may have to skip the poll. Give it one more shot.
Let's see.
So yeah, I wonder if is Falante Riddle on yet? No. Okay, so in that case, should we just proceed with the main topic?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
It's
Okay, so-
7:30, yeah.
All right, so let me introduce Anthony. So he's our main speaker for the night, and he's going to talk about affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is another tool that we have to move forward in racial justice for housing. Anthony Deducis is Director of Policy and Research at Abundant Housing LA, which is dedicated to making Los Angeles County more affordable, diverse, and vibrant region where everyone can afford a place to live. His data-driven urban planning research and policy proposals encourage equitable housing growth. Anthony has used data to help businesses recruit workers and solve problems with experience in the banking, food and beverage, and tech industries. Originally from Long Island, New York, Anthony is a graduate of Harvard College and the University of Chicago's MBA program. He lives in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles. Welcome, Anthony. Now you can take it away.
all right, Bert, thank you for the introduction. Thank you, everybody, for the warm welcome tonight and the opportunity to share some knowledge and thoughts around affirmatively furthering fair housing. What I'm going to try to do tonight is three things. Over the course of, I'm going to try to keep this to like 30, 40 minutes, and I'm going to try to accomplish three things. I want to give a little bit of background on the history of racial discrimination in housing in the United States. I want to explain what affirmatively furthering fair housing means at the federal level. And I want to fill you in on an opportunity that people in cities across California have right now to promote fair housing in their communities. And so with that, if you give me just a moment, I am going to pop my deck onto the screen. Are you able to see full screen all right?
Yes, yes.
Well, let's dive in. So before we start, just a word about my organization, Abundant Housing LA. We are a pro-housing political advocacy organization that makes the case for more homes in more places, which we believe is necessary to fully address and end the housing shortage and housing crisis in Southern California. So we advocate for housing reform at all levels of government in support of lower housing costs, more welcoming, prosperous, and sustainable communities where people of all backgrounds are welcome and fully part of the community. And so Bert gave a great background on me personally, so I won't dwell on this too much, but my role in Abundant Housing is Director of Policy and Research. So my number one priority is understanding big, messy data sets about the housing market to help illustrate the case for housing reform and to help design solutions at all levels of government. The number one thing I've done well in my career is that I'm good at using data sets to help explain problems and design solutions for them. I've mostly done that in the private sector, but now I'm doing that in the world of housing advocacy. I've been in Los Angeles for 5 years and I've been part of the AHLA team for 3. So before we dive in, I want to take a few minutes to just run a few questions by the group, and anyone is welcome to tell their story, put up their hand, and think through these questions with me. But the 3 things I'd like you to take a moment to think about is to ask yourself, is your city diverse? Race, ethnicity, backgrounds, income, age. And if it's not, why do you think that is? Another thing to think about is what you believe your city can do to make people of all backgrounds and walks of life feel more welcome. And to also think about whether you or someone you know has ever experienced discrimination in housing firsthand. So take a few seconds to noodle on these, and if you have something to say, please feel free.
So Anthony Deduces, we were able to access the poll, and I think it'll answer some of these questions. So if we could do that.
Even better.
Yeah, I think it's even better. I mean, what you have is great. I think we need to discuss that, but let's do the poll right now. You need to first stop share so we can do that. Thanks. So you guys take a few minutes and answer these questions. Don't forget to go down. There's a number of questions there. Keep moving down.
Can other people see them? I can't see them.
Oh, you can't see the poll questions?
I can't.
Okay.
Bert, I believe we can see them.
Oh, you can? Everybody
Yeah.
else can see them? Okay.
Can you go down? Just 15 more seconds and we'll end polling. Yeah. I can't see the time. Great. Okay, let's end polling. And I'm going to share the results. So this will give Anthony a pretty good idea for the great discussion questions he had. Can you see the results?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So we have a number of advocates for affordable housing, one elected or appointed official or several. It's interesting what it says about your neighborhoods, if it's mixed or primarily a particular color. A lot of people live in an all-white neighborhood. Have you ever heard a sermon on racial equity? That's encouraging. Don't know that too many people hear sermons on land use, but gratefully a lot of people learning about what it means to love. And then as far as your church attendance, have you ever heard a message by a speaker other than the main ethnicity of your church? And which is interesting. And then if you keep going down, what percentage of the city do you think is African American? Actually the answer, if we have our statistics right, it's 8.77.
That's right.
Which is a dramatic decrease just from 2 years ago. And so what percentage of African Americans have left Pasadena in the last 10 years and why? So some of these stats may not be completely accurate. It may be upward even to 50% that have left our city, which is tragic. And so, so all of the above, of course. So let's stop, share results, and have that discussion that Anthony kicked off for us.
Okay, let me just share my screen once more. Excellent. So anyone should feel welcome to speak up if they have thoughts on any of these questions.
Well, I can tell you that I have experienced discrimination in housing on more than one occasion.
Yeah. Thank you, Dr. Walton. We should have you come and speak about all your experiences. It's very dramatic what you've experienced.
All right.
I don't think I've Andre, slightly younger than Dr. Walton. I don't think I've ever experienced housing discrimination.
Yeah, I'd say you're more than slightly younger.
I would say I live in Los Angeles. It's mostly white, and that's basically discrimination.
Yeah.
I mean, and from my own experience being homeless, I was homeless, and being housed, it's like the people assigned to you, they only tell you about certain areas. Because I found out about Hollywood basically on my own. So otherwise I'd be in a segregated neighborhood in Los Angeles with my Section 8, like most African Americans. Yeah. It's deliberate.
Yeah.
You're talking about steering. Yeah, and it's terrible. That is a thing that exists, and it's
yeah, I heard that about real estate, about
yes.
how you can go to a real estate person, a realtor, and they'll tell you, oh, well, we don't have any more houses over here, but in that neighborhood, yeah, we got this, and you'll be more likely to get a loan over here than in this neighborhood, and get financing and stuff. And it's even the same thing housing homeless people. I don't think it's the actual person. I guess it's just the agency they work for.
Yes,
for some reason.
I think you've all hit on something that, as you'll see in a moment, is pretty fundamental to what I have to say, which is that explicit discrimination has been illegal for decades, but
yeah,
vestiges of it continue to have an impact today through less things that are more than meet the eye. You know, they're like less obvious channels through which discrimination continues.
Yeah, I have a good example of that. When I was looking for housing with my Section 8, and I went to the place and they were like, fine, before I got there. And then when I got there, it was like a totally different deal. They overpriced the apartment knowing that the housing authority wouldn't pay for it. I didn't know that. So I sat around and I wasn't able to get in there because they didn't want to come down on the price. They knew it was too high, but so I didn't find out so much later. That's apparently what they do. Because they have other people there on Section 8, but they're all white. So, and that's right out here where I live too.
So what Cassandra is saying, I've heard many times happening here as well in Pasadena. In fact, the pastor I mentioned in my introductory comments, Pastor Manning, when he went to purchase his home, it was similar. They did racial steering, and so it's very real.
Yeah.
And thankfully, not everyone is experiencing it, as Andrew White shared. But
or they overprice it.
Yeah, right.
Knowing it's out of your range.
Yeah.
Yes. So thank you for sharing that. So I guess, sorry, just to continue on, I will just give you a little bit of background on this could be a whole presentation in and of itself, but I'll speak to the roots of racial discrimination in housing in the United States. So there are a couple of main tools that prior to the civil rights movement were used to promote and maintain race-based exclusion. So what you're looking at right now is something called a restrictive covenant. And what that is that used to put clauses in property deeds that said that you could only rent or sell a property to, you'll see here they call it a member of the Caucasian race, which means in those days people of Western and Northern European descent. So of course that kind of a clause made it very difficult for Black Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans, also Southern Europeans and Jews to purchase homes in certain cities and neighborhoods. So this was a very explicit way of banning people based on what part of the world their ancestors are from. Something that's similar is what's called redlining. And the idea here is that in the 30s and 40s, a government agency divided up cities they categorized neighborhoods in cities based on desirable, so green and blue, declining, yellow, or hazardous, red. Now, of course, how did they reach these definitions? To a significant extent, it was, are there people of Black, Latino, Jewish, Asian background living in these areas? If so, then the redlining map would consider them to be declining or hazardous. And so that, number one, made it hard for people of many backgrounds to live in the more desirable parts of the city that were, generally speaking, all white. It also had a lot to do with who could access mortgage credit, right? Because banks and the federal government would use these maps to help determine where they were willing to extend mortgage credit. So again, this is a very explicit way of blocking many different kinds of people from living in parts of cities. Now, the other piece is one that continues to exist today. And here I'm talking about zoning. So zoning are rules that limit what kinds of buildings can be built where. And while they are race neutral on the face, you can see how there are ways in which zoning can be used to block affordable housing and maintain patterns of racial segregation into the present. And so what you're looking at here is a map of central Los Angeles. So you're looking at like Los Feliz, Silver Lake, Echo Park, Atwater Village, East Hollywood. And what you're looking at, so this is a redlining map, and on top of it, I've put in orange places where apartments are banned, where it's zoned to only allow single family homes, period, right? Look at the way, I'm not sure, can you see my mouse cursor on the screen?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So you can see for yourself the zoning rules that exist in the city of Los Angeles today map pretty closely to the redlining maps from the 1930s. So like, just look at this pocket here in Hancock Park, look at Los Feliz, look at parts of Silver Lake, and how that compares to Little Armenia, Echo Park, where apartments are legal. So zoning on its face is race neutral, and it's not always intended as a way to maintain racial segregation, but in practice, it often does. Now, in the 1960s, a whole series of reforms passed that combated discrimination in housing on the basis of race, color, religion, and national origin. So in 1963, here in California, the state legislature passed the Rumford Act, which was sponsored by a pioneering Black member of the California Ledge, a fellow called William Rumsford, who's a pharmacist from Berkeley who got into politics. And the Rumford Act made housing discrimination illegal in California. The next year, the voters passed Prop 14, which overturned the Rumford Act and made it legal again to discriminate on the basis of race. But then 2 years later, the California Supreme Court said Prop 14 was illegal and the Rumford Act was back in place. 2 years later, nationally, the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which is sometimes called the Fair Housing Act, banned housing discrimination nationwide and required the Department of Housing and Urban Development to administer its programs in a way that affirmatively furthers fair housing. So we're for sure going to come back to that term. So now, was discrimination solved? No, of course not. I mean, since the civil rights movement, the United States has come a long way. Neighborhoods and cities are more integrated than they were in the 1960s, and America is home to a burgeoning Black, Latino, Asian middle class. And that's something to celebrate. But there is a lot more work to be done. There are still many barriers to affordable housing, especially in majority white, high income neighborhoods. So just to give you a brief example, what you're looking at is a map of the city of Los Angeles where the orange dots are locations where public housing are. The beige neighborhoods are places where white people are the majority. The green neighborhoods are places where Latino people are the majority. So notice, this is not a huge shock. Like, unfortunately, all the public housing is generally concentrated in Latino neighborhoods. That neighborhoods where the majority is white, where land is more expensive. Oftentimes, those neighborhoods are pretty good at fighting off low-income housing, affordable housing, or getting zoning laws passed that block affordable housing. So that's just one example that barriers to affordable housing remain very formidable today, unfortunately. And one of the ways in which this happens has to do with exclusionary zoning. So if you look on the left, that's a map of Los Angeles, the city. The green neighborhoods are downtown Hollywood, Koreatown. Those are places that have built a significant amount of housing in the last 7 years. The red neighborhoods are everything else. And those are places where very little new housing has been built. And then when you ask yourself, well, why? If you look at the right, this is a zoning map of Los Angeles. The blue neighborhoods are the places where it is legal to build apartment buildings. The pink neighborhoods are the places where you can't build apartments. So apartments are not allowed on 75% of the land in LA that is zoned for housing. So what you're basically requiring in most of the cities is a form of housing that is expensive, right? Most people can't buy or rent a single family home in the city of LA where it can cost upwards of $800,000, right? So you're basically making it quite difficult for most people to live in these parts of the city. And so the result is that in recent years, lower income neighborhoods in the city of LA have produced about half of the city's new housing. That's this yellow bar here. But high income neighborhoods have only built about 10% of the new housing, even though both those categories of neighborhoods have roughly the same amount of land. And the reason that not much new housing is getting built in these high income neighborhoods is that it's not allowed most of the time, right? So restrictive zoning is one way that the law still has major barriers to affordable housing in high opportunity areas, places with good jobs, good schools, convenient access to mass transit, good environmental quality, the things that families need to live their best lives. And so when I say that cities are still seriously segregated, I'm going to give you one example. This is the city of LA. And so what I've done here is I've I have the redlining map again. And in purple are the parts of the cities where white people are the majority, right? The darker purple it is, the higher the percentage is. So white people are the majority in parts of the Valley, in parts of the Santa Monica Mountains, in Fairfax, Beverly Hills, the West Side. Whereas now, this is where when people of color, Black, Latino, Asian added together make up the majority. So the more purple the area is, now the bigger the Black, Latino, Asian percentage is. So you see the pattern is quite similar where these are the yellow and red line track parts of the city. So redlining has been illegal for decades, and yet these patterns still persist. And that has real ramifications for the quality of people's lives. So one more map here, and then we'll shift gears. This is something called the California Healthy Places Index. It's basically an aggregation of a bunch of different measures of quality of life, like access to opportunity, transportation, environmental quality. The blue areas score really well as healthy places. The brown areas do not. And so the stakes are very real. We have barriers in place that make it difficult for people of many different backgrounds to live in the healthy places, the most high opportunity, economically prosperous parts of the city. So now let's shift gears and we're going to talk a little bit about what affirmatively furthering fair housing actually means. So the federal government defines it as not just the elimination of housing discrimination, but also the promotion of residentially integrated communities, meaning that it is not enough to stop discriminating on the basis of race and ethnicity. Like, okay, wonderful, we don't have restrictive covenants anymore, we don't have redlining, that's great, but that's not enough to solve the problem. That you have to take active steps to make neighborhoods more inclusive and welcoming to people of all backgrounds. And so to that end, in 2015, the Obama administration took a step in that direction, a modest one, where they said from now on, cities that receive federal money from certain programs relating to housing have to examine local barriers to fair housing and create a plan for rectifying these problems. Now, like I said, this is modest. This is just one source of funding, and it doesn't put firm commitments on cities to actually do anything. It means they have to examine them, but it's a step in the right direction. So in 2020, the Trump administration repealed that rule, where they said, we're against AFFH. We want to, they're coming for your suburbs. So it was a very naked play for contesting the suburban vote and trying to stir up discord between racial groups. Fortunately, it was not successful. This year, President Biden restored the 2015 rule and also seems likely to introduce a new rule that's called the disparate impact rule. And so what that means is that policies that are on their face race neutral but have discriminatory impacts are not allowed. And the president also endorsed something called the HOME Act, which Senator Cory Booker and Representative Jim Clyburn have put forward, which would condition more sources of funding in transportation and community development on cities taking active steps to reduce exclusionary zoning practices. Now, that's not law yet, but it might be, and that would be, I think, a good thing. But the number one thing to take away here is that AFFH means it's not enough to stop discriminating. You have to undo past patterns of discrimination and promote integration of communities. Now, what does that mean for us here in California? For me to properly answer that question, I need to take a minute to explain something called a housing element, because this is a big piece of the advocacy that my team does at Abundant Housing LA. A housing element is a long-term document, a strategy for housing growth that every city in California has to update every 8 years. And so what ends up happening in practice is that the state law requires that cities have to accommodate a housing growth target. And they have to put together a plan for how they're credibly going to achieve that. They have to put together policies and programs that will achieve that target. They have to do what's called a sites inventory, where they identify underutilized parcels in their city where they expect housing to be built in the future. And if there's not enough of them to meet the housing growth target, then they have to rezone. They have to change the law so that more units are allowed on parcels. The other piece of this that's important and really relevant for our discussion is that housing elements have to affirmatively further fair housing. And so the takeaway here is that over the next 8 years, cities across LA County have to plan for 800,000 more homes, which they, if they achieve that, would be about a 1/4 increase in the housing supply in our county. That's a big deal. And we have to, and my organization believes very firmly that we have to hold cities accountable so that they do it, but also do it in a way that promotes welcoming, inclusive neighborhoods and cities. So how do we do that? What does it actually mean to affirmatively further fair housing in a housing element? So the state law, Assembly Bill 686, that was passed a couple of years ago, says that when cities update their housing strategies, they have to take meaningful actions that combat discrimination, overcome patterns of segregation, and foster inclusive communities. They have to address disparities in housing need. They have to replace segregated living patterns with integrated living patterns, transform what are called racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity, and they have to comply with civil rights and fair housing laws. Now, what you'll notice is that these are all things that are hard to define in practice. How do you measure the extent to which a city has overcome patterns of segregation? How much is enough? What are the right data sources that can give you an answer to that question? So the honest answer is that no one knows the full answer to that question. To some extent, it's in the eye of the beholder. But the state housing department put forth some new rules about a month ago that provide a little bit more clarity on what cities have to do when they plan for affordable housing opportunities. So number one, they have to plan for more affordable housing citywide, including high income, high resource areas that have good access to jobs, transit, schools, and parks. Number two, they're not allowed to just concentrate affordable housing in racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty, which is something that happens today all too often. And they have to commit to specific actions for removing barriers to housing. And I believe they are going to set the bar particularly high for affluent, high opportunity cities. It's not enough for a city to say, well, we're going to rethink our zoning code. They have to say, we are going to institute X, Y, and Z reforms to encourage 1,000 more units of housing by 2025. You have to be specific, right? Because otherwise things don't get done if you're not specific. But again, the key takeaway here is that cities have to promote affordable housing in their communities in a way that reduces the concentration of lower income households in lower income neighborhoods. They have to create opportunities citywide. Again, this is a hard thing to measure, but there are a couple of data sources that can help us, things that I'm going to use and my teammates are going to use to hold cities accountable. So for that first part, high opportunity, promoting affordable housing in high opportunity neighborhoods. The California State Treasurer has something called the TCAC Opportunity Map. And what they do is they score every neighborhood in California based on economic opportunity, education, and environmental quality. So what I've got here in blue is the parts of the LA region that score high on those dimensions. And so if cities don't promote affordable housing opportunities in these parts of their cities, they're probably doing something wrong. So that's number one. Number two is kind of the opposite of that. They can't concentrate affordable housing opportunities in lower income neighborhoods or what's called a RECAP, a racially or ethnically concentrated area of poverty. There's a technical definition that HUD puts out. But what you're looking at here is a map of the San Gabriel Valley. And the neighborhoods that are darker red are places where the majority of people have either low or moderate income, so below average, right? And so HCD, the State Housing Department, says that cities have to plan for lower income housing in a way that reduces the concentration of low income households in these dark red areas. So like imagine you have a city where 50% of the low income households live in these dark red areas. If you promote new affordable housing opportunities in high income areas, a lot of them, then you have more people with lower incomes able to live in high opportunity areas, and the concentration of low income people in poorer parts of the city goes down. That's a good goal. And then finally, I mentioned a minute ago that high income cities, I think, are going to have the bar set high for promoting housing opportunities and reducing what I call intercity racial segregation. So I'm going to use South Pasadena as an example. And if you live in South Pasadena, I'm not trying to pick on South Pasadena. It's a very nice city, but at some level the numbers don't lie. And so this map is every neighborhood based on the percentage of the people who live in that neighborhood that are Latino. Darker purple means a higher Latino population. So over here, you have the Highland Park and the El Sereno neighborhoods of Los Angeles, where the majority of people are Latino. Here you've got the city of South Pasadena, where I think about 20% of the population is Latino. So that boundary is like surgical in its precision, right? That it's a function of, do you live in the city of Los Angeles or do you live in the city of South Pasadena? And the deal is that South Pasadena makes it very difficult to build housing, affordable housing, market rate housing, all kinds of housing, period. And so that acts as a force that keeps housing costs very high and makes it difficult to live in South Pasadena unless you have a very high income. And so because of the relationship between income and race in the United States and the wealth gap, that is kind of a race the intent may not be racist, but in practice, it's a real barrier to creating opportunities for Latino people to live in South Pasadena. And so the bar should be set high for a city like South Pas to say, we are going to hold you accountable. You need to change your laws to make it easy to build affordable housing in your city. And so what is that going to look like in practice? So we can use maps and we can use data visualization to help understand whether a city's housing plan promotes the integration of these high opportunity neighborhoods. And so here, this is the city of Santa Monica. These are hypothetical. The idea is that very dark blue neighborhoods have high incomes and light blue neighborhoods have low incomes. In Plan A, the city's put most of the new affordable housing opportunities in lower income neighborhoods. In Plan B, they put most of the opportunities in high income neighborhoods. I would argue that Plan B promotes fair housing and Plan A does not. We can look at this a different way too. So in Plan A, you can see that lower, middle, and high income neighborhoods have roughly the same amount of land, but most of the low income, the affordable housing sites are in the low income neighborhoods and very few of them are in the high income neighborhoods. Again, that probably doesn't affirmatively further fair housing. Plan B does the opposite. It puts a lot of the affordable housing sites in high income neighborhoods. I would argue that does promote AFFH. So these are the kinds of methodologies that my team and I look for to answer a pretty tough question, which is, does the city do enough to promote fair housing opportunities for people of all backgrounds? A couple of last things to share with you, because cities are now in the process of updating their housing elements, of developing these long-term plans. They have to finalize them by October, but they're putting together drafts right now. And a couple of cities have been pretty bad actors, in my opinion, on AFFH. So in Santa Monica, nearly all of the sites that have been proposed for lower income housing are in lower income parts of the city that were once redlined. I'm going to show you a map of that in a second. In Redondo Beach, most of the new low income housing that the city is required to accommodate is being proposed on the Northrop Grumman headquarters, which is in an industrial site in a freeway. And they're not encouraging it in a part of the city where the environmental quality is much better. Burbank is doing something similar. And in South Pasadena, the city is saying, oh, we're going to accommodate X units of lower income housing, but they're planning for it on sites that are never going to get developed, like their city hall. They're not going to redevelop their city hall. They need a city hall, right? And so these cities are playing games because they don't want to legalize affordable housing and apartments on single family zoned parcels because they don't want to annoy higher income homeowners. I don't think that's a very good decision. And, but that is something that cities feel the pressure to do. One visual example I'll give you just to make this real. This is the city of Santa Monica. One of our volunteers overlaid the redlining map over modern day Santa Monica. And all of these blue and green sites are the places where Santa Monica says they're going to accommodate new housing growth. Notice how almost all of it is in the part of the city that was once redlined, and almost none of it is in these blue, desirable areas. The blue areas are all have heavy single family zoning. It's not legal to build apartments there. And so Santa Monica doesn't want to legalize apartments there. And if you know this city, like, this is where the expo line is. So certainly there's a logic to having some housing opportunities near transit, near jobs. But there's no logic for having no new housing opportunities in other parts of the cities too. You have to be balanced. Now, it's not all bad news. There are good things happening in this direction in some cities. So Sacramento and Berkeley are taking steps towards legalizing up to 4 homes on any parcel. They're saying we're not going to have single family zoning anymore. If you want a single family house, not a problem. But if you want to build a duplex, if you want to build a 4-plex, that's also allowed. The LA City Council instructed its planning department to create an equitable distribution of housing around the city. Santa Monica got a lot of blowback from its original approach to promoting housing growth. And so they've told planning do this in a way that rectifies historical exclusionary zoning. And Culver City is also thinking of legalizing apartments in some parts of the city where the only thing you're allowed to build today is a single family home. These are green shoots. These are good steps in the right direction. But there's more we can all do. And I will get to that in just a sec. But if you were to ask me, okay, what kind of specific concrete steps should cities take to promote more housing, more affordable housing, and more welcoming integrated neighborhoods? I would argue that cities should do 4 things. They should legalize more homes. So change the zoning laws, change the land use laws that ban apartment buildings and ban affordable housing. They should make housing easier to build so that it can get approved faster and get built faster and be available for people to move into. We need to fund affordable housing more generously, and we need to strengthen renters' legal rights. And I would argue that all of these things together promote equity and racial justice in our communities and get us to a future with housing for all. There could be a whole presentation about what kind of specific things cities need to do that fulfill these 4 goals, but we can talk about that during the Q&A if you like. Last point for you is that the housing element process is happening right now in your city. And if you want to have an impact on it, if you want a housing element that promotes fair housing and fully conforms with the letter and the spirit of the law on AFFH, there's a lot you can do. When cities release draft housing elements, you should scrutinize them, read them. If something smells funny to you, it probably is. You should write letters to the city, to your mayor, to the State Department of Housing if you see things that look discriminatory. You should work with other community groups who are more effective when we pull in the same direction. You should partner with lawmakers in your city who are committed to change. And you should make your voice heard in the public arena. Write an op-ed in your community newspaper, on a blog, get your voice heard. And so these are a few more specific steps in terms of how you can get involved. Now, there's a few months before the deadline for these plans in October. And for several months after that, the State Housing Department is going to review these plans and determine the extent to which they pass muster legally. But now is an opportunity to get involved and to, sunshine is the best disinfectant, right? If you're watching, you have the power to demand better from your city. And so this is an opportunity to transform LA County cities for the better in a way that I believe is beneficial to everybody. I think that this is the path to a future with more housing, more access to jobs and transit, lower housing costs, less traffic, less segregation and displacement, less homelessness, more economic opportunity, and a cleaner, safer, healthier environment. I think that there's an opportunity to advocate for all of these things at the same time, because the funny thing is that the housing crisis makes a lot of other problems worse. But fixing the housing crisis will help to solve a lot of other problems and keep us moving in the right direction on many, many fronts, including the very important goal of promoting communities where people of all races and all backgrounds are welcome and free to build great lives. think I kept it to 30, 40 minutes, but now I have talked at you for a long time, and that means you have an opportunity to ask some questions of me.
I'm going to kick off the first question, and I know we have a speaker with Palante. She's going to share her story of discrimination in the city of Pasadena. But I'd like to, there's two things I'm concerned about with this law. And I hear a lot of feedback in the other room. So we've got in areas where, and thank you, this was fabulous presentation. It's incredible research. We want to see if you could show us a few maps of Pasadena, because I think people are mostly interested if you could bring some up so we could see that. So that's my first thing. And my second thing is that when I was directing the STARS program at Lake Avenue, and whole apartment buildings were being sold out from under the kids involved. And there was an apartment complex, affordable, in their neighborhood, and it was incredibly transformative. So that would be an apartment in a low income community that was very powerful. And I see that affordable housing, sometimes it's not seen as a positive and it should be spread throughout the city, when in reality it can be used as a tool for economic development and really helping to fight gentrification. So here in Pasadena, the average home right now is about $1 million. So we want affordable housing in those lower income communities, just so people aren't displaced. So I'm confused about affirmatively fair housing and my concern about that. So, yeah.
No, that's so both great question. I'm going to share my screen for a sec. I'm going to answer your second question first. So you're 100% right, Jill, that in some ways AFFH can be a little contradictory, right? So if you say, okay, overcome patterns of segregation and foster inclusive communities, then the logical extension of that is, okay, great, we should plan for a lot of affordable housing in communities that have a history of blocking people or where housing costs are very high. But then you also have transform racially and ethnically concentrated areas of poverty into areas of opportunity. And then you might think logically, okay, then we should be building more affordable housing in areas that have lower incomes or in these areas, concentrated areas of poverty, because this is going to improve the housing stock. This is going to create new housing opportunities for people who fear displacement. I think a reasonable person could make the argument like, gee, don't these two things contradict one another? And I guess this may not be a 100% satisfying answer, but I would argue that we need to do both. Because what happens today is that if affordable housing gets built at all, it's predominantly built in lower income areas or in these concentrated areas of poverty. And I think that we need a balanced citywide approach. We do need to drive investment dollars and affordable housing to upgrade the housing stock in places that have experienced disinvestment and are concentrated areas of poverty. But we also need to do that. We also need to create affordable housing in the high opportunity parts of the city where housing costs are very high and there are significant barriers to accessing great schools and jobs and convenient transit and environmental quality. So I know
we've got just a few minutes left. If we could have time for maybe two other questions, but I also
you want to see my
yeah, if you could give us a map of Pasadena, I think that's where people would like to see.
No question. All right. So what you are looking at now is the TCAC map that assesses, it gives a score from highest resource to low resource for every neighborhood in California. So where I'm mousing my cursor over right now is the city of Pasadena. And so you can see there are parts of the city that have a high and highest resource. So like, actually, let me do this for a second. Give me just a moment. I'm highlighting right now the parts of the region. And so again, you use your imagination on like the border of Pasadena that have high or highest resource scores. But then you also have moderate resource neighborhoods. And there's even one or two neighborhoods in Pasadena that are considered low resource or high segregation and poverty. And so my understanding, my interpretation of AFFH is that it would be illegal and not in keeping with the spirit of AFFH if they promoted all the affordable housing opportunities just in the low resource areas. What I would argue they should do is that there should be opportunities created in every neighborhood, including the high resource parts of the city. One other map I'm going to share with you that you might find useful. This is something that the State Housing Department published. And there are a ton of different data sources in here, and I will share both links with you. But one that I want to show you specifically is this definition of low to moderate income population. So again, the dark red areas are places where the majority of people have low or moderate incomes. The light colors are places where the majority have above average incomes. And so once again, you can see pretty similar patterns where there's this kind of L shape where these communities have high proportions of low moderate income residents, and these outer areas have high proportions of high income residents. So hopefully that is helpful in answering your question.
Thank you. There's a couple other questions, but I'm concerned also about, I think, Bert, if you could kind of lead us from here. Yeah. Thanks.
Yeah, so why don't we go ahead and take Anne Marie had her hand up. Anne Marie, do you want to ask your question?
Oh, it was a great presentation. Thank you so much. And because you've been talking about data and how it affects people, one of the things, I was a banker for 13 years and a first-time homebuyer counselor, and my predominantly Latino base would not fill out the demographic information on the loan applications because they perceived it to be discriminatory, when in fact the bank was determining how much money they should invest in Latino neighborhoods, you know, as far as like Community Reinvestment Act, how much dollars they should put towards programs. And I think that there needs to be better education as to how important these data numbers are. So when you're doing these numbers, a lot of people of color don't fill out the information. They just leave it blank, or they feel that the categories don't correctly represent them. So when we're doing all this analysis of data, like we're not getting 100%, you know, like we are missing people who are falling through the cracks because they just don't know what the data is for. So I think that that's something that should be stressed as to why people of color who are purchasing homes, who are refinancing, who are investing in real estate, that it's really important that those numbers are accurate, and we have to do a better job of educating people as to the benefits of it.
Very well said. That's a great point.
Great, thanks. Yeah, thanks for making that point, Anne Marie. Why don't we now go to Dr. Falante Riddle, who is going to share with us her story. It's a local story of what she and her family experienced here in Pasadena. Dr. Riddle?
Hi, Falante, you with us?
Yes, I am. Thank you so much. I apologize for being late, but
Okay.
family.
Well, I understand, and that's wonderful. Family is so important.
Yes.
I'd like to introduce Falante, and then she'll share her story. It's my pleasure and my privilege to introduce Dr. Falante Riddle, who currently serves on the Mayor's Housing Task Force and also took part in our MHCH Vigil for Affordable Housing and Racism. Dr. Riddle has had a distinguished career in the police force and was the first African-American female sergeant, lieutenant, and adjutant to the chief of police in the history of Pasadena's police department. Riddle also served as former district director and external affairs consultant to Assemblyman Chris Holden, and was appointed by Governor Newsom to the Juvenile Parole Board. Assemblymember Holden described Dr. Riddle as a proven leader who spent her life serving the community, advocating for those in need, and bringing people together to find resolutions to problems. It's been a joy getting to know Falante, and I'm pleased that she's seeking solutions to our housing crisis and sharing her personal story about racism and housing in Pasadena. So Falante, could you begin by telling us your housing story?
Yes, thank you very much. Wow, I'm gonna make sure you introduce me in the future. There's so much to tell about Pasadena. My family, and I'm speaking on behalf of my husband's family because we've been married 42 years. Our children are fourth generation Pasadena. Our grandchildren are fourth generation Pasadena. And his father was born here in Pasadena in 1918 with 1916. His mother was born in 1918 here in the city of Pasadena. And their families migrated. His father's father migrated in 1898 from Ohio. Yes, and his mother's father migrated in 1906 from the South. So when I say we're Pasadenians, we're Pasadenians. But in the 210 freeway, just south of John Muir High School, was an established community, African American and Japanese, very established middle class neighborhood. And I say just south 17, I don't know, I see some Pasadenians on this line. So the 1700 block of Kenilworth was where the 210 freeway right at Saco, just about before you get to Saco, just going west of Saco, was a neighborhood. And it was unfortunate that in the late 1950s, early 1960s, 64 for our particular family, that the state and the city decided to bring the freeway through that neighborhood, demolishing, well-established community. And Anthony had asked me how much were they paid. Well, dollars were not what they were then, but even then, that particular neighborhood was about $85,000 and more. And the most that any family could get was $75,000 to move your family elsewhere. A lot of Pasadenians moved out of the community. Eddie's and Ralph Riddle's father moved into Altadena. So they in a sense, severed their Pasadena living, residency. But I shared one of the most interesting thing is that freeway goes back even further to the 210 south of Colorado, because that was an established African-American community. People often wonder, how did Friendship Baptist Church get at Dayton and DeLacy? Well, that was an African-American community. It was thriving, low, medium income, high income, established businesses. And again, the state, federal government, the state and the city decided that they could not take that freeway through areas such as Caltech and some of our more affluent white communities at that particular time. And so they plowed through that entire neighborhood. And if anyone I know a lot of people here probably know about Fane Church. That's the oldest Black church in the city of Pasadena. With they were established. The city of Pasadena, 1886 was established, and Fane was 1887. So that's how far back that church goes. And it was on Vernon, and that was the church that my mother-in-law, Frida Riddle, was born into in 1918, and was there for the first 3 years. And when this development came through, was forced from that community, and there was no freeway at that particular time. I always say north of the freeway, but north of Orange Grove, all those homes were demolished. And so, it's been an ongoing thing. I shared with Anthony, there's so many stories. One of the things, I'm not an official historian, but man, do I love my Pasadena history, and especially with regards to minority communities. And so one of the things that is important to know is that where the Rose Bowl sits now was Negro Canyon, no surface street, no concrete. So when it rained and that rain came down into that canyon, it flooded out everyone. No one wanted to live there. And so a lot of people that were migrating, you know, in those early turn of the century lived in Negro Canyon, way before the Brookside Plunge in 1914 was built. And so consequently, when it was decided that that was a perfect spot for the Rose Bowl, guess who got moved out? So it happened over and over and over again. And they didn't even have the courtesy to allow African Americans, Negroes at that particular time. The name changes are amazing. But to even use that pool. On Tuesdays, it was Negro Day. And so you could literally go to the Brookside Plunge. They would drain the pool Tuesday night and refill it Wednesday early morning so that the white families could come back. And so Ruby McKnight Williams, who moved here in the 1930s, was shocked that she came from Mississippi. And she said, Pasadena is Mississippi, just spelled differently. You know, because she ran up against, she came here to be a teacher. She had a teaching credential, and she came here to be a teacher, and African Americans were not allowed to teach in the Pasadena School District. And so she worked her way different methods to get involved with teaching. And as many of us know, became a legend with the NAACP in Pasadena and went back to sue with Thurgood Marshall and others, sue the city of Pasadena and the Brookside Plunge to have access without restrictions. They won that lawsuit, but the city closed the pool down until 1947 to get around it. But eventually they had to open the pool. I know I have 5 minutes. I talked fast, but that's what I had to say.
Thank you so much, Volante, for your presentation. I'm wondering, you've worked for Chris Holden. Do you want to say something about some of those bills that he's sponsoring?
Oh gosh, yeah. Well, one of the bills that I had shared with Anthony, Chris and I had worked together many years. As a matter of fact, I was with the police department, and Chris was a city council person in 2000, and I worked the census for him through Pasadena for those hard to reach families, so we could get proper, accounting of families in this community. In particular, we had a large influx of Latino families, and we wanted to get a true count. So we go back even that far and further. But as I was sharing with you, is that one of the bills that he's sponsoring, and I didn't pull it up, the number for tonight, I can shoot it to you, you can share it.
I'll put it in the chat.
Exactly. Is one of the bills he is sponsoring has to do with just training for appraisers. Appraisers have been in 2021 lowballing appraisals on African-American homes, and how they were, I guess I'll use the word caught since I'm a former police officer, how they were caught is that they literally, a person thought that their appraisal was too high, had one of their white friends come and, call another appraisal from that same company, and they got a higher appraisal on their house. And then finally started seeing that this was a common thread through not just that company, but others. And so Assemblymember Holden has sponsored a bill that has just cleared the Assembly appropriations. And it is to ensure that all appraisers go through training, racial justice training prior to being able to do appraisals.
And then there's there's also affordable housing on the 710.
Yes, and so go ahead, please.
Well, do you want to say anything about that? That's relevant to what you were describing, because that area was African Americans pushed out of that area.
Right.
And now Chris Holden is talking about making sure that affordable housing is built in that.
It has to be inclusionary, and it's not. One of the things I share with you is when we went through the terrible building of the King's Village, and I know people may have, but it was the density, it was an East Coast model from back in my days of visiting my dad in Manhattan, in Harlem. No, and so one of the things that we want to make sure is that people of every income bracket can live anywhere in this city that they choose to. It shouldn't just be, I share with him, Anthony, that I live in Lower Hastings now. And I'll tell you, back in the 40s, 50s, 60s, it was not, it was, realtors were not allowed to even show you this house that I'm in right today. And it said Negro on your application. They were sued. And in 1970, they lost that lawsuit. So they started putting a happy face on the application to get around it. And many, many, many years later, you know, they being realtors started being a little more free with showing. But even the realtor that I had, when I initially told her that I was interested in this house because it was on the market, said, oh, let me show you some other houses. And she took us to the Northwest. And I said, I already live at 620 Del Monte. I know exactly where, you know, I saw this house on patrol for the last 30 years and I wanted to live in this house. And she says, are you sure you want to live in that area, that you can afford it? Literally, this woman, before I fired her, told me that I had a champagne taste on a beer budget.
Well, this is great, sharing these lived experiences, because they really illustrate what Anthony DeDudas has been talking about and what we're trying to change in our city. So thank you so much for sharing your story. Really appreciate it. Anthony, do you want to close us out? Is there some more things that you want to tell us? We're almost out of time. It's 8:30.
We have a couple announcements we need to make, and then,
Okay.
yeah.
Yeah, let's do that.
Did you want to make those announcements, Bert, or did you want me to do that?
You can go ahead and do it. I'm not sure which announcements you were referring to, so you can go ahead and do that.
Okay, Anthony, if you could put those in the chat again for us. So our next Housing Justice Forum 1 month from now, it's always on the fourth Tuesday. And that is going to be about how to address NIMBYism. So we have a pastor from the San Pedro area who is actually able to address NIMBYism in her community and overcome that. So be sure and stay tuned and put that on your calendar now. So Anthony's putting that on the chat. And the other thing is, last month we had our Housing Justice Forum on ADUs. And so that was kind of a springboard and a launch for being able to build a granny flat and giving you the tools to be able to walk down that path. So that committee is having a series of 4 different kind of workshops to help equip you to be able to do that. So next Tuesday on the 1st of June, if you're interested in an ADU on your property or just want to learn more about it, or if you know someone else interested, be sure and come to that meeting so you can learn how you're going to select a contractor, how you're going to go about selecting a designer. So, so those are the 2 announcements. If you can close us out, and I just say a huge thanks to Anthony. It was just fabulous. And I loved hearing what you had to say, Volante. Thank you. So Bert, take it away.
Well, yes. Was there one more thing that Anthony DeDudas was going to say? Or did you put all that in the chat?
Just wanted to give everyone my sincere thanks for inviting me here today and for giving me the opportunity to present. I've popped the links to the presentation and to the 2 maps in the chat. I will also make sure that Bert, Jill, and Anthony have those links so that they can share them over email as well. But thank you again. A lot of fun.
Well, great. Yes. Thank you, Anthony. That was an awesome presentation. And thank you, Dr. Riddle, for your story. That was very informative. And thank you, everyone, for coming. And next month, as Jill said, we're doing this again, 4th Tuesday of every month. It's our monthly Housing Justice Forum. So we hope to see you back next month. So good night, everyone. If you want to stick around and chat a little bit, some of us will hang on. But otherwise, good night. Thanks for coming.